By the beginning of 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was already woven into the fabric of American history. To millions, he was the moral voice of the civil rights movement. To others, he had become one of the most controversial figures in the country. And to the federal government, he was a man under constant surveillance. King had risen to national prominence more than a decade earlier during the Montgomery bus boycott. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, inspired by Christian theology and Mahatma Gandhi, reshaped protest in the United States. Sit-ins, marches, and boycotts replaced armed confrontation. The goal was not domination, but transformation. From a psychological perspective, King possessed a rare combination of traits. He was both empathetic and unyielding, calm in demeanor yet uncompromising in principle. Those qualities made him an effective leader, but they also made him a threat to entrenched power structures. By the mid-1960s, his influence extended far beyond racial segregation. He began speaking openly about poverty, labor rights, and economic inequality. Then, in 1967, he publicly opposed the Vietnam War. That moment marked a turning point. Many former allies distanced themselves. Political support eroded. Media portrayals grew harsher. Internal divisions within the civil rights movement deepened as younger activists increasingly questioned nonviolence and patience. This case teaches us something critical about social movements. The most dangerous moment for a reformer is not when they are ignored. It is when they begin connecting struggles across systems of power. King was no longer advocating for civil rights alone. He was challenging the moral foundation of American economic and foreign policy. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had monitored King for years. Under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau viewed him as a destabilizing figure. Wiretaps, informants, and psychological pressure campaigns were authorized. Though no evidence of criminal behavior was found, the surveillance itself reflected the intensity of institutional fear surrounding him. Despite this, King continued traveling relentlessly. In early 1968, his focus shifted to Memphis, Tennessee. There, African-American sanitation workers had gone on strike after years of unsafe working conditions and unequal pay. The strike was not only about wages, it was about dignity. Workers carried signs reading, "I am a man." For King, this struggle fit squarely into his evolving mission. Economic justice, he believed, was inseparable from racial justice. If segregation was a moral crime, then poverty enforced by policy was one as well. But Memphis was volatile. Previous protests had turned chaotic. Violence had erupted. Local authorities were hostile. National attention was intensifying. Advisors warned King that returning to Memphis carried serious risk. He went anyway. From a behavioral standpoint, this decision reflects a pattern often seen in transformational leaders. Risk becomes normalized. Threats are contextualized as part of the mission. Survival becomes secondary to purpose. By April, King was physically exhausted, emotionally strained, yet still resolute. When his plane approached Memphis, it was delayed after authorities received a bomb threat. Those close to him later recalled that King seemed unusually reflective afterward. He spoke openly about death, about legacy, about the possibility that he might not reach old age. The night before his death, he delivered what would later be known as the "I've been to the mountaintop" speech. The speech was not frantic, it was not dramatic, it was calm, measured, almost serene. He spoke about longevity but dismissed it. He spoke about having seen the promised land, and he acknowledged openly that he might not get there with them. Forensic psychologists later noted how unusual this level of explicit mortality awareness is in public figures. It was not despair, it was acceptance. King ended the speech by reassuring his audience. He was not afraid, he was at peace. The movement he believed would continue regardless of what happened to him. At the time, many assumed this was metaphorical language, a rhetorical flourish, a preacher's cadence. In hindsight, it reads differently. By the next evening, King would be gone. But before that moment arrived, he was still a man with plans. Dinner with friends, another day of organizing, another step forward. Nobody present understood that they were standing at the edge of history and that everything was about to change. April 4th, 1968, began quietly. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. woke at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, a place he and his colleagues had stayed many times before. Room 306 had become familiar, comfortable, predictable. That sense of routine mattered. Familiarity creates a false sense of safety, even in high-risk environments. Outside, Memphis remained tense. The sanitation workers' strike had dragged on for weeks. The city government refused to negotiate. Police presence was heavy, national attention was growing. For King, this day was meant to be transitional. He planned to meet local leaders, regroup after earlier unrest, and prepare for another march. From a strategic standpoint, this pause was deliberate. King understood momentum. He also understood restraint. Throughout the day, members of his inner circle noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He joked more than usual. He appeared relaxed, almost relieved. This phenomenon is sometimes observed in individuals who feel a sense of closure, whether consciously or not. By late afternoon, King was preparing to leave the motel for dinner. He had accepted an invitation from a local minister, Billy Kyles. Others in the group waited below, gathered near the car, calling up to King to hurry. The Lorraine Motel was not a fortress. It was open, exposed, and visible from multiple vantage points. Just before 6 in the evening, King stepped out onto the balcony outside his room. He leaned casually against the railing. He spoke briefly to those below. There was no urgency, no sign of fear. It was an ordinary moment, made significant only by what followed. Then, a single shot rang out. The sound echoed sharply across the motel courtyard. At first, some thought it was a car backfiring. Others froze, unsure. Within seconds, confusion turned to panic. King collapsed on the balcony. The bullet struck his face and neck, causing catastrophic injury. Those closest to him rushed to his side. Blood loss was severe. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the damage had already been done. King was transported to St. Joseph's Hospital. Doctors attempted resuscitation efforts, but surgical intervention was not viable. The injuries were incompatible with survival. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. The psychological impact was immediate. Within hours, grief turned into rage across cities nationwide. Crowds gathered, fires burned, National Guard units mobilized. For many Americans, King's death symbolized the collapse of hope for peaceful change. Meanwhile, the investigation began. Witnesses reported seeing a man fleeing from a boarding house across the street from the Lorraine Motel. A bundle had been dropped near the entrance. Inside were a rifle, binoculars, and personal items. Fingerprints recovered from the objects provided investigators with their first solid lead. The rifle was identified as a high-powered hunting weapon. Ballistic analysis later confirmed it was consistent with the fatal shot. This was not a crime of opportunity. It required planning, positioning, and patience. Attention quickly turned to the man who had rented a room in the boarding house under the alias John Willard. That name was false. The individual was James Earl Ray. Ray was a career criminal with a history of theft and escape. He had recently fled prison, he held deeply racist views, and he had been moving across state lines under assumed identities. From a behavioral standpoint, Ray fit a familiar profile: transient, isolated, driven by grievance rather than ideology. After the shot, Ray fled Memphis almost immediately. He abandoned the weapon, he discarded clothing, he traveled under false documents. This pattern of behavior aligns with what investigators describe as instrumental flight. The goal is not concealment forever, but distance and delay. For nearly 2 months, Ray evaded capture. Law enforcement agencies coordinated across states and borders. Leads poured in. Most went nowhere. But eventually, Ray's path led overseas. He was detained at Heathrow Airport in London while attempting to travel using a forged passport. Extradition followed swiftly. Back in Tennessee, Ray faced charges for King's death. On March 10, 1969, he entered a guilty plea. The decision shocked many. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison, later extended after an escape attempt. 3 days later, Ray recanted. He claimed he had been framed. He introduced alternate theories. He alleged conspiracies involving shadowy figures and government agencies. These claims would persist for decades, fueled by distrust, secrecy, and the scale of the loss. This is where the case becomes more complicated. Confessions followed by recantations are not unusual. They can stem from fear, regret, manipulation, or strategic calculation. In high-profile cases, they often become the foundation for doubt, regardless of evidentiary strength. And doubt would define everything that came next. Because for many Americans, including members of King's own family, the idea that one man acted alone felt insufficient. Too simple, too convenient. The truth, they believed, had to be larger, and the search for that truth would last generations. In the days following Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, the investigation moved at an unprecedented pace. The pressure on authorities was immense. The nation was in mourning. Cities were burning. Political leaders demanded answers. Law enforcement needed a resolution, and they needed it quickly. From an investigative standpoint, the case against James Earl Ray appeared straightforward. Fingerprints recovered from the rifle and binoculars matched Ray. The weapon had been purchased by him weeks earlier. Witnesses placed a man resembling Ray fleeing the boarding house immediately after the shot. The timing, location, and physical evidence aligned. Ballistics analysis further strengthened the case. The bullet recovered from King's body was consistent with the rifle found near the scene. While the bullet itself was damaged, experts concluded it could not be excluded as having been fired from Ray's weapon. On paper, the evidence was sufficient. Yet even at this early stage, cracks began to appear in public perception. The speed of Ray's guilty plea raised questions. There was no full trial, no jury heard the evidence, no witnesses were cross-examined. For a case of this magnitude, the absence of public scrutiny felt unsettling to many observers. From a psychological perspective, this matters. People are more likely to accept outcomes they witness unfold. When justice appears procedural rather than transparent, doubt fills the vacuum. Ray later claimed he pled guilty out of fear. He said he was pressured. He insisted he would not survive a trial. 3 days later, he withdrew his confession and began telling a different story. According to Ray, he had been manipulated by a mysterious man he called Raoul. This individual, Ray claimed, directed his movements, supplied money, and orchestrated events. Ray positioned himself as a pawn rather than the planner. Investigators attempted to verify this account. They found no credible evidence that Raoul existed. Still, the idea took hold. As years passed, new inquiries emerged. Congressional committees revisited the case. The House Select Committee on Assassinations reviewed available evidence in the late 1970s. Their conclusion was careful. They reaffirmed Ray's role, but did not entirely rule out the possibility of limited assistance. That ambiguity proved powerful. It allowed competing narratives to coexist. One grounded in forensic evidence, the other fueled by historical context and institutional mistrust. The role of federal agencies became central to this skepticism. It was already known that the FBI had surveilled King extensively. Internal memos revealed hostility toward him. Attempts to discredit him had occurred. None of this proved involvement in his death, but it established motive in the public imagination. This case helps us understand how prior misconduct shapes belief. When institutions lose credibility, even unrelated conclusions are questioned. In 1999, the controversy deepened further. A civil trial in Memphis, brought by the King family, examined claims that a local businessman named Lloyd Jowers participated in a conspiracy to arrange the killing. The jury concluded that King's death resulted from a conspiracy involving multiple parties, not Ray alone. The verdict was not criminal. It did not carry prison sentences. But symbolically, it mattered. The U.S. Department of Justice later conducted its own review. After examining thousands of pages of documents, prosecutors stated there was no reliable evidence of a broad conspiracy or government involvement. They reaffirmed Ray's guilt as the individual responsible. 2 conclusions, 1 case, no consensus. From a forensic psychology standpoint, unresolved ambiguity keeps cases alive indefinitely. When emotional weight intersects with incomplete transparency, certainty becomes elusive. Even today, some records remain sealed. Surveillance files, intelligence memos, internal communications. These documents are scheduled for release in 2027 unless further legislative action delays them again. Their contents may answer lingering questions, or they may simply confirm what is already known. What is clear is this: the investigation into King's death became more than a search for facts. It became a referendum on trust. Trust in institutions, trust in official narratives, trust in justice itself. And for many, that trust had already been broken long before April 4, 1968. The case was no longer only about who pulled the trigger. It was about whether the full truth had ever been told. The death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did not end a movement, but it changed it forever. In the immediate aftermath, the United States experienced one of the most intense periods of civil unrest in its history. More than 100 cities saw demonstrations, clashes, and widespread destruction. Federal troops were deployed. National Guard units patrolled American streets. For many, King's death symbolized the loss of a moral compass at a moment when the country was already deeply fractured. From a sociological perspective, assassinations function as shock events. They collapse timelines. Before and after become sharply defined. The future imagined moments earlier no longer feels possible. For the civil rights movement, King's absence created a vacuum. His philosophy of nonviolence remained influential, but it no longer had its most visible advocate. More militant voices gained prominence. Patience gave way to urgency. Hope, for some, was replaced by anger. This shift was not accidental. History shows that when moderate reformers are removed, polarization accelerates, compromise becomes harder, extremes become louder. King's death did not create this dynamic, but it intensified it. In the years that followed, James Earl Ray remained imprisoned. He filed repeated appeals, he sought new trials, he continued to insist he had been framed. None of his efforts succeeded. Courts consistently ruled that the evidence did not warrant reopening the case. Ray died in prison in April of 1998, still maintaining his innocence. For the King family, closure never came. They publicly questioned the lone actor narrative. They criticized the original investigation. They expressed deep mistrust toward federal agencies that had targeted King during his life. For them, the case was not simply legal, it was moral. The 1999 civil trial in Memphis reinforced this perspective. Although symbolic rather than criminal, the jury's finding validated long-held suspicions in the eyes of many supporters. To others, it represented a lowering of evidentiary standards driven by grief and distrust. This case illustrates a critical psychological principle. Truth and belief are not always aligned. Facts can be established without being accepted. Beliefs can persist without proof. When trauma intersects with history, emotional truth often outweighs forensic certainty. King's legacy is institutionalized. His speeches are taught in schools. A national holiday bears his name. Monuments stand in his honor. Yet even this canonization carries complexity. The radicalism of his later years is often softened. His critiques of capitalism, militarism, and systemic inequality are frequently omitted. This selective memory matters. It allows society to celebrate the symbol while avoiding the discomfort of the message. King is remembered as a dreamer, but less often as a critic of power. The assassination also reshaped how the government handles transparency. Public pressure following the deaths of King, President John F. Kennedy, and Senator Robert Kennedy contributed to later reforms in record preservation and disclosure. The fact that assassination-related documents remain classified decades later reflects ongoing tension between national security and public trust. Unless further delayed, remaining files related to King's death are scheduled for release in 2027. Some expect revelations, others expect disappointment, most expect controversy. What is certain is that the documents will not change the central truth. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was targeted because his ideas were powerful, because they were unifying, and because they threatened systems that depended on inequality. Whether James Earl Ray acted alone or not, King's death was the result of a society unwilling to fully accept the changes he demanded. This case teaches us something enduring. Violence against leaders rarely silences ideas, but it often delays progress, and it leaves wounds that generations struggle to heal. King once said that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, but only through persistent effort. His assassination tested that belief, and the fact that the question still matters tells us something important. The work he began is not finished.